Have you ever been absolutely certain you were right about something, only to discover that half the world disagrees with you? Not just disagrees, they think the exact opposite is obvious. And you're sitting there thinking, how is this even possible? Are these people living on a different planet? Here's the uncomfortable truth. They're not crazy, you're not crazy. But both of you are trapped in the same psychological glitch that's been hijacking human perception for thousands of years. In 2016, researchers at Stanford ran a fascinating experiment. They asked college students a simple question: what percentage of your classmates share your political views? Liberal students were confident. About 75 to 80%, they said. Conservative students gave the same answer about their positions. The actual split? Almost exactly 50-50. Both groups overestimated support for their views by nearly double. This wasn't ignorance. These were smart, educated people attending one of America's top universities. They had access to the same data, walked the same campus, ate in the same dining halls, yet they lived in completely different perceptual realities. Welcome to the false consensus effect. The psychological mechanism that makes you believe your perspective is normal, common, and obvious, while making everyone else's perspective seem weird, rare, and inexplicable. Back in 1977, a psychologist named Lee Ross at Stanford discovered something disturbing about human nature. We don't just hold opinions, we project them onto everyone around us. Then, we treat those projections as facts. Ross ran a deceptively simple study. He asked students to walk around campus wearing a sandwich board sign that said, "Eat at Joe's." Some agreed, some refused. Here's where it gets interesting. Students who agreed to wear the sign estimated that 62% of others would also agree. Students who refused estimated that 67% would also refuse. Both groups couldn't be right, but both were absolutely certain they were. This isn't just about college kids and silly signs. This is about how your brain constructs reality every single day. Psychologist Solomon Asch put it perfectly decades ago. Most people are convinced that their perceptions are accurate reflections of reality. They rarely consider that others might be seeing something fundamentally different from the same situation. Think about your last argument on social media, your last political disagreement, your last fight with a partner about something that seemed obvious to you. How many times did you think, why can't they see what I see? This is so clear. The answer isn't that they're stupid, or brainwashed, or morally compromised. The answer is that they're doing exactly what you're doing, taking their internal experience and assuming it's universal. Your brain isn't showing you objective reality, it's showing you a customized version of reality filtered through your experiences, your values, your fears, and your desires. Then it tells you this filtered version is what everyone else must be seeing too. And here's the really scary part. The more confident you are in your view, the stronger this effect becomes. The people most convinced they're seeing objective truth are often the ones most trapped in their own subjective bubble. Today we're going to break down why your brain constantly lies to you about what other people think, how this creates everything from toxic relationships to political polarization, and most importantly, how to actually see reality instead of just seeing your own reflection everywhere you look. Because if you don't understand this mechanism, it's controlling you right now. Without your knowledge, without your consent. Let's dive in. Think of your brain like a flashlight in a dark room. You can only see what your beam illuminates. Everything outside that circle of light might as well not exist. That's not a metaphor. That's literally how your perception works. Your experiences, your values, your history create the beam. And your brain assumes that everyone else's flashlight is pointing at the same spot. They're not. They're scattered all over the room. But you can't see their beams. You can only see yours. In 2008, researchers at the University of California discovered something crucial about how this works. They showed participants disturbing images of environmental destruction. Animals covered in oil. Forests on fire. Polluted rivers. Then they asked, what percentage of Americans care deeply about environmental issues? The group that saw emotional images estimated 73%. A control group that only got statistics and charts estimated 41%. Same country, same issue, the only difference was which information was emotionally available to each group. And that availability completely changed their estimate of what others believed. This is called the availability heuristic. Whatever is most vivid and accessible in your mind feels most common in the world. If you just watched a documentary about police brutality, you'll overestimate how many others have seen similar content and share your concerns. If you just read an article about false accusations, you'll overestimate how many others share your skepticism. Your brain doesn't have access to everyone else's information diet, so it assumes yours is typical. Imagine you're at a dinner party. You're vegan. Suddenly it feels like every conversation is about meat. Someone mentions a steakhouse, another person talks about barbecue, someone else shares a burger recipe. You think, My God, these people are obsessed with meat. In reality, there were probably 15 conversations that night. 7 about work, 5 about movies, 3 about travel plans, but your brain filtered for the ones that conflicted with your identity. This isn't malicious, it's efficiency. Your brain processes 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind handles about 40. Something has to get filtered out. The problem is what gets kept. And what gets kept is whatever resonates with who you already are. Google conducted an internal survey back in 2012 that perfectly illustrates this. Software engineers were convinced that 90% of their colleagues opposed a new code review process. Managers believed 80% supported it. The actual split, 53% in favor, 47% opposed. Engineers talked to engineers, heard complaints, assumed that's what everyone thought. Managers talked to managers, heard support, made the same mistake. Each group mistook their sample for the whole population. But here's where it gets darker. We don't just think others are like us. We want them to be like us. Because if they're not, we're alone with our views, and being alone with your views triggers the same brain regions as physical pain. A University of Michigan study found that people who feel lonely are 34% more likely to overestimate how many others share their opinions. It's psychological self-defense. Your brain creates an illusion of support to ease the pain of isolation. Now add social media to this mix. You like a post about climate change? The algorithm shows you more posts about climate change. You see 20 posts a day confirming your view. And you think, clearly this is what most people believe. Actually, that's just your algorithmic bubble. Someone with opposite views is seeing 20 posts a day confirming their perspective and thinking the exact same thing. Research from MIT showed that Facebook users overestimate agreement with their political views by 58%. They're living in a world where their opinion feels like the mainstream. Step offline and reality is shockingly different. When you think the majority agrees with you, something dangerous happens. You stop listening to counterarguments. Why would you? The truth is obvious. Most people see it. Only a few outliers don't get it. This kills dialogue. This breeds radicalization. Both sides of any conflict believe they represent the majority. Both see opponents as a fringe minority. In reality, each side is just seeing a projection of their own beliefs. Everywhere they look. Have you noticed this in your own arguments? When it seemed like the other person just refused to see something obvious? Maybe it wasn't them refusing. Maybe it was you seeing a projection instead of reality. In 1974, German researcher Elisabeth Noel Neumann described what she called the spiral of silence. The concept is simple but devastating. If you think your opinion is in the minority, you stay quiet. When you stay quiet, others who share your view also think they're alone. So they stay quiet too. The spiral tightens. What starts as perceived minority becomes actual silence. Even when the supposed minority might actually be the majority, we saw this play out in corporate America with devastating consequences. Take Uber in 2017. A toxic culture of harassment and aggression pervaded the entire company. How did it get that bad? Every new employee who joined saw aggressive behavior. Thought, I guess that's how things work here. That's what everyone accepts. Started acting the same way. New people saw even more examples. The belief reinforced itself. In reality, internal surveys later revealed that most employees were uncomfortable. But each person thought they were alone in their discomfort. Each person thought everyone else endorsed the culture. The false consensus effect created a toxic environment that nobody actually wanted. Princeton University research from 2018 revealed something shocking about political polarization. Democrats believe that 55% of Republicans are racists. Republicans believe that 50% of Democrats are communists. The real numbers, less than 10% in both cases. Both sides created a caricature of their opponents, then projected that caricature onto the entire opposing group. Result? Impossible dialogue. Why talk to racists? Why engage with communists? The projection killed any possibility of understanding. But there's an even more insidious mechanism at work. When like-minded people gather to discuss an issue, their positions don't stay stable, they radicalize. Why? Each person thinks the group believes what they believe, so they try to be slightly more extreme to appear consistent and committed. Think it's the new group norm. Move even further in that direction. The spiral continues. Within a few meetings, a moderate group becomes extreme, without any external pressure, just through projecting their own views onto each other. Political scientist Cass Sunstein documented how public norms collapse through false consensus. Imagine someone publicly breaks a rule. A politician lies blatantly. In the past, this was unacceptable, but if nobody reacts strongly, others think, I guess this is normal now. Even though everyone is privately shocked, but each person thinks they're the only one shocked, that others have accepted the new norm, so they stay silent. Silence gets interpreted as acceptance. the norm is destroyed. Not because the majority wanted it destroyed, but because everyone thought the majority wanted it destroyed. The Washington Post database documented over 30,000 false claims from one politician over 4 years. Why didn't this end their career? Because supporters thought, all politicians lie. Everyone knows this. Opponents thought, their supporters don't care about truth. Both were wrong. Most supporters did care, but they thought other supporters didn't care, so they stayed quiet. The projection created a reality that didn't actually exist. The scariest consequence is self-censorship. You start censoring yourself, not because of external pressure, but because of internal conviction that your position is marginal. Pew Research found that 62% of Americans are afraid to share their political views publicly. Why? They think their views are unusual. In reality, for most of these people, significant portions of the population share their views. But the false consensus effect created an illusion of isolation, and that illusion silences millions of voices. Do you ever stay quiet thinking your opinion is weird? What would happen if you learned that millions of others think exactly the same way? Here's the first hard truth. You will never see reality objectively. Your brain is physically incapable of it. But you can recognize the distortions, and you can correct for them. Think of it like wearing glasses. They don't fix your eyes, but they compensate for the defects. When you think you know what others believe, stop. Consciously tell yourself I'm projecting. Then ask, what's the most different perspective from mine that could reasonably exist? Not to agree with it, but to expand your map of reality. Columbia University research showed that people who regularly practice this are 41% more accurate at estimating opinion distribution in groups. Here's a concrete technique. Before any important meeting or discussion, take out a piece of paper. Write down your position. Then write 3 possible alternative positions. Not straw men, the strongest versions of alternatives. This takes 5 minutes. But it changes the entire conversation because you enter understanding, my position is one of many, not the only rational one. The loudest voices don't equal the majority. Social media created a world where 10% of users generate 80% of content. That 10% is often the most radical, most emotional, most certain. But they don't represent the other 90%. The 90% stay quiet, not because they agree with the loud voices, but because they're exhausted by conflict.
Or uncertain, or just busy living life. Look for data, not impressions. When someone says everyone thinks this, ask based on what by.
Often the answer is 5 friends or 20 comments. That's not everyone. That's a sample. Look for representative research, even imperfect studies that attempt to capture diverse groups. They always show more diversity than your bubble suggests. Here's a test. If reality never surprises you, you're in a bubble. A healthy world is diverse. People make choices you wouldn't make, think differently, value different things. If everyone around you constantly confirms your views, it's not because you're a genius, seeing truth, it's because you've surrounded yourself with mirrors. Actively seek surprise. Read media from the opposite political spectrum, not to get outraged, but to understand. Talk to people from different social classes, not to educate them, but to listen. Every time you're surprised, that's a signal. You've stepped outside your bubble, that's good. When you catch yourself thinking, normal people don't do this, stop. Decode that sentence. It really means, I don't do this, so I assume most people don't either. That's projection. Truth is millions of people do this every day. Not because they're abnormal, but because normal doesn't exist. Different norms exist for different contexts. Try rephrasing. I wouldn't do this because my values are different. But for someone with different values, this makes sense. This seems like a small change, but it fundamentally shifts how you think. In groups you lead, explicitly encourage disagreement, not diplomatically, structurally. Assign someone to be devil's advocate, not for conflict, but for completeness. Bridgewater, the world's largest hedge fund, uses radical transparency. Anyone can challenge any decision, not privately, publicly. It's uncomfortable, but it destroys the illusion of consensus. People see that disagreement is normal, and they stop projecting their own agreement onto everyone else. The false consensus effect won't disappear. It's built into how your brain works. But it can be recognized, and once recognized, it loses half its power. You start seeing the world not as confirmation of your views, but as a kaleidoscope of different realities, each legitimate for those living in it. This week, do something simple. Find someone whose opinion irritates you, and ask, why do you think that? Not to convince them, but to understand. You might not agree, but you'll see their logic makes sense from their position. And that destroys the illusion that they just don't get it. They get it, just differently. Share this video if it made you question something. Write in comments. When's the last time you were genuinely surprised that someone thought differently? Because acknowledging surprise is the first step to seeing reality. The biggest danger isn't that we're wrong. It's that we're certain. Certain we know what others think. Certain our reality is the only one. That certainty, not knowledge, builds walls between people. Only one thing tears it down: the willingness to see that others live in different worlds. And all those worlds are real.